Wave 2 for NATO Forces is due out soon, and thanks to Battlefront, I can give you a sneak peek at what's coming. In this video, I'll check out all the products in this release, plus I want to give you an overview of the force they're for. Stick with me, there's lots of fun stuff here. So, we've already had the Belgians, Dutch and Anzac forces in the first wave of this NATO Forces release. What's next? Canada! The NATO Forces book with the formations in has already been released, so what we need next is the Canadian unit card pack. It's the first new product due out in the NATO Forces second release wave on October 21st. This has 34 unit cards for the Canadian Forces, both the original units from Free Nations and all the new ones from NATO Forces. These are just the Canadian cards. There's no Allied support cards included here. With 3 different national options for Canadian Forces to take as allies, there'd just be too many of them. You'll have to buy the card pack for whatever Allied support nation you choose. A couple of the most exciting of the new Canadian units are the Grizzly wheeled APC and the Cougar fire support vehicle. These are separate box sets. Grizzly has 5 resonant metal wheeled APC kits in the box, while Cougar has 4 of the fire support variant. These 6x6 wheeled vehicles share a similar chassis derived from the Swiss Moag Piranha. Grizzly has a small one-man turret armed with a 50 caliber heavy machine gun and carries a section of infantry. Cougar has the 2-man turret from the Scorpion light tank, mounting a 76mm low-pressure gun. It can act as a reconnaissance vehicle, and its heavy armament can provide useful fire support. Both these vehicles were intended for use within Canada by reserve formations. This makes them useful for fighting the home front invasion outlined in the Red Dawn release. Next up is the Iltis Patrol. Iltis was a Volkswagen-designed light utility vehicle adopted and license-produced in Canada. These filled the scouting role, but could also be used in the anti-tank role too. The Iltis Patrol box is a resonant metal kit containing 4 vehicles. 2 Iltis Jeeps mounting tow launchers, and 2 with light machine guns. Most Canadian lists with a tow vehicle option can take the Iltis as an alternative, armed with the improved tow missile. 2 Iltis Jeeps in a unit seems a risk for morale in Team Yankee, but if you think about it, it's an open-topped 4x4. They're as likely to be destroyed as bailed. Morale rolls might not be the big issue here. They're worth the points for scouts, or for cheap anti-tank. Iltis form the core of the recon and anti-tank power of the new Canadian Airborne company too. More on that later. Canadian Forces get a mechanized platoon blister of 44 figures, plus there's an Airborne weapons group blister of 30 figures. The mechanized platoon has enough figures to make 3 C2 SAW teams, a C1 rifle team HQ, 3 Carl Gustav teams, 1 C5 GPMG team and a 60mm mortar team. There's also additional figures included to replace the Carl Gustav figures with the new Eryx Missile options if you choose to upgrade your infantry. There's also a direct-only option to buy 4 Eryx Missile armed figures if you need to add this option to your existing Canadian infantry. The Airborne Weapons Group blister has figures to build 4 81mm mortar teams, 4 50 cal HMG teams, and 2 C5 GPMG teams. This is designed to provide the heavy weapons teams for the Airborne Company list. These will give your Airborne Company some much-needed organic fire support. So that's the new release products coming for NATO Forces in Wave 2. The Grizzly and Cougar are going to be popular. They look like really fun infantry transport and support assets for Canadian Forces. The addition of Eryx to the mechanized infantry and the Airborne Weapons Group gives some nice depth too. Plus the Iltis continues the proliferation of wheeled 4x4s in Team Yankee. Now we've seen the upcoming product releases for Wave 2, let's look at Canadian Forces. This is going to be a quick overview, but there's plenty to like here. The Canadian National Force diagram is huge. Canada in Team Yankee is fighting both in Europe and now, after Red Dawn, on home soil as well. Their forces are represented by two formation groups, the 4th Canadian Mechanized Brigade and the Canadian Force Mobile Command. The Mechanized Brigade has the heavy armour, up to 3 armoured squadron formations each of Leopard 2 or Leopard C1, and up to 4 M113 mechanized companies. This brigade represents the Canadian formations fighting on the ground in Europe. Facing the Soviet invasion at home is Canada's Force Mobile Command. This has lighter reserve units, with up to 3 Cougar armoured squadrons and 3 Coyote squadrons available. Cougar is the 6-wheeled AVGP, while the Coyote is the LAV-3 8x8 vehicle. There's also up to 4 mechanised infantry companies mounted in the Grizzly 6x6 wheeled APC. But I think the next option will be the one a lot of people will be excited for. You can take up to 4 airborne companies from the Canadian Airborne Regiment. These are heli-borne infantry units transported by UH-1 Huey helicopters. Canadian support options are ADATs or blowpipe AA, as well as 155mm artillery and an armoured OP. As usual, you can also take a single black box combat unit as a formation support option, as well as 1 NATO formation as allied support. The formation diagram also gives Canada access to 3 nations in support: Britain, West Germany and America. The Allied support notes here suggest Canadian forces in Europe should use the 4th Mechanized formations and be limited to West German or US support. The Force Mobile formation is fighting on Canadian soil and can take support from all 3 nations. Although again, you can only take support units from one of these nations at a time. Once you pick one, all the Allied support units for your force must be drawn from that same nation. Given the Canadian Air-Sea Transportable Brigade Group was tasked to reinforce Norway in wartime, you might justify running some Grizzlies in Europe as well. These units regularly participated in NATO exercises. There are no surprises with the Leopard 2 Armoured Squadron list. You can take a 1 or 2 tank HQ, plus up to 4 2 to 4 Leopard 2 tank troops and an M113 mechanised platoon. This is all pretty standard for Canadian armoured lists, just with the upgraded Leopard 2 tanks. Organic support options are a tow anti-tank section and up to 3 recce patrols. Your tow options now include the M113 TUA anti-tank section. TUA, or Tow Under Armour, is a Canadian version of Norway's NM142, with a turret mounting twin tow launchers. This tow unit gets the hammerhead rule, meaning they can shoot from cover. Coyote joins the recce patrol options, giving an alternative to the Lynx. All these are solid and useful upgrades that also flow through to the Leopard C1 armoured squadrons and the M113 mech companies. Shifting to Canada's home forces, this is the Cougar Armoured Squadron. The structure is identical to the Canadian tank-based squadron, but with the Cougar 6x6 instead. There's a HQ of 2 to 3 vehicles, and each troop consists of 3 to 4 Cougars. Cougar is the 6x6 AVGP chassis mounting the 76mm turret from the British Scorpion. You won't be taking on Soviet tanks with these, but the AT-14 main gun is plenty for anything else. Your infantry options here include the Grizzly mech platoon mounted in the APC version of the AVGP chassis. The only other difference to note is in support, where the anti-tank section has the Iltis tow anti-tank section instead of the TUA. This is a pair of light 4x4 utility vehicles with tow missile firing posts. The structure of the Coyote Armoured Squadron is the same, just with the 8x8 LAV-3 instead of the 6x6 Cougar. The Grizzly Mechanized Company has a HQ and up to 3 Grizzly Mechanized platoons, plus a single Cougar troop providing organic fire support. There's also a mortar platoon, 3 TOW anti-tank options with M150 or Iltis, and 3 recce patrols with either Lynx or Coyote. This should be a very solid and self-contained formation with strong organic firepower supporting the infantry. What might not be immediately apparent at first glance is the overall lack of tank options in the force mobile formations. The Home Forces Grizzly, Cougar and Coyote lists don't have tanks as an option. Tanks will be formation support options, or you'll have to rely on your organic anti-tank missile units. This might be a good time to mention the Eryx Missile upgrades. Eryx is available as an upgrade for Canadian infantry. It replaces the Carl Gustaf teams in the platoon at +1 point per team. That's a big cost, but it's a big upgrade. It has the same 16-inch or 40-centimetre range as the Carl Gustaf, but the anti-tank jumps from 17 to 24. A big improvement. However, you can't fire Eryx if the infantry team moved in the movement step, something you could do with a penalty with Carl Gustaf. There's no minimum range, so Eryx can fire in defensive fire, but while it is a short-range system, it does have firing and tracking limitations close in. To reflect this, Eryx gets the no assault special rule. This specifies how these teams work in assaults. Check out page 10 of the book for full details. Eryx also gets the tandem warhead rule to defeat ERA armour. Along with the upgrades to Milan, Dragon and Hot ATGMs, infantry with Eryx are going to make life uncomfortable for the heavier tanks the game has introduced previously. But I've saved the most radical new formation till last. Force Mobile Command adds airborne troops to Canadian Forces. This is truly an exciting option. I'm guessing it will be very popular. The company structure is a HQ plus 3 helicopter-borne airborne platoons. Each platoon has 4 to 6 SAW rifle teams and a Carl Gustaf team, transported in 3 to 4 Huey helicopters. These troops get access to Eryx missiles as an upgrade option as well. The Mechanized infantry blister gives you the figures to field the standard airborne platoon. There are up to 2 additional C5 GPMG teams you can include, and the figures for those are found in the Airborne Weapons Group blister. The company has an attached HMG platoon armed with 50 caliber machine guns. The Weapons Group also includes the figures to add 4 HMG teams, as well as for 4 81mm mortar teams. You can take additional helicopters to carry the 50 cals. In addition to the mortars, the Airborne Company's organic support options include up to 3 each of the Iltis-mounted recce patrols and TOW anti-tank sections. These lightweight utility vehicles form the core of the recon and anti-tank power. They have the mobility and portability required for this rapid reaction force to operate effectively. Just remember that both of these are platoons of 2 vehicles, open-topped light vehicles, so they will be necessarily fragile. Anyway, that covers the new releases due in this wave, as well as a brief overview of Canadian formations as they stand in NATO forces. As with the previous nations we've looked at, they're a mix of new and exciting units, as well as solid upgrades for the existing ones. Leopard 2 will be a welcome heavy armour option, as will the Hammerhead TOW Under Armour M113s. But the biggest expansion is for the Home Forces. The Cougar and Coyote armoured squadrons and the Grizzly-borne infantry bring a lot of variety, and the Canadian Airborne formation is a whole new type of unit for Canadian Forces. I expect to see a lot of these on the table. It will also be interesting to see how viable pairs of Iltis utility vehicles are in the anti-tank role. Infantry have more teeth, with Eryx set to make a big difference here. Even heavy tanks will need to be worried about getting close to infantry teams. What formations appeal to you the most? If you have Canadian Forces already, what are you going to change or add? Or have things like the Grizzly or the Airborne Company persuaded you to give these a go? How do you think the Iltis TOW anti-tank sections are going to go? Are you going to pay the extra points for Eryx missiles for your Canadian ground pounders? Let us know in the comments below. Once again, thanks to Battlefront for supplying the PDF of the book for this review, and selecting Fog of War as the NATO Forces content partner for this release. Thanks for watching. See you next time.